Hello, welcome to our panel today, looking into world building in real world settings. That sort of key issue where the real world meets fiction, whatever genre you're writing in, that sort of liminal space, the interface between the two. And we have an amazing group of people here today to discuss it and hopefully shine our way to have navigate those waters between real world and fiction, starting just in the order they're appearing on my screen. E, if you want to present yourself, please.
Sure. I'm E.M. Anderson, or E. I write contemporary fantasy, so that's fantasy set in more or less the real world. And my fantasy usually, like in my debut, which is up here on screen, The Remarkable Retirement of Edna Fisher, the magic just exists alongside real world things. It's not hidden in any way. So I'm really looking forward to this panel.
Yep, that's fantastic. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing from your perspective there as well. Sounds awesome. Ronni, please present yourself.
I'm Ronni Davis. I am a writer of YA love stories and romance, and my stories are set in our world, but not our world. So it's like a made up version of our world, and they're all set kind of in the same universe. So I have a lot of fun with world building on that. So I'm really looking forward to talking more about that.
Definitely sounds fun. Joseph, could you please go next?
Um, I'm Joseph S. Samaniego. I'm a high and epic fantasy author, and most of the worlds that I guess encompass the universe of my books is modeled after a Middle Ages, medieval, Dark Ages Earth. So there's a lot of familiarity, a lot of things that are a little different. And I also am a fantasy cartographer. So I make a lot of fantasy maps, either for books, for, just regions, just for fun, or tabletop games. So
That's amazing. I love that so much. Last but certainly not least, Darío.
Thank you very much, Jay. Everyone, hi. Well, I'm Darío Aguilar Peregrina. I'm a writer of different topics, mainly about my Latino culture. Also, I like to create things based on fantasy, also action, and obviously, I love writing many different genres. My novels normally touch different themes, just such as mature themes. For example, Hurricane 77 is rated R, but for example, Latin dancing is about my Latin culture, the music of Latin America, and also how it has this impact on the world. So those are the things that I normally write. Thank you.
It's amazing. No, thank you. Thank all of you. I'm your moderator, J.R.H. Lawless. I guess I suppose I kind of bring an extra little thing to complete the panel because my currently published series, the three books there, they're set in a bit of a near future. So still real world settings, very much, very grounded, but in a bit of a projection, starting out like, 40, 50 years in the future. And completely real world settings between London and Quito, Ecuador, or whatever. It's all over the place, right? So I think between all of us, we've got a really, really broad look at things, and absolutely love that. So getting right into it then, how, just nuts and bolts, basic question then, how do you think that world building in a real world setting is different? What are the fundamental differences between real world settings and entirely purely speculative settings? And open that to anybody who wants to jump in. Don't be shy, don't worry, and anybody can go there. I'll call on people if I feel that you need a little bit of a little bit more focus, but yeah, go for it.
I feel like for me, at least, the real world stuff is easier because I know the rules already. I don't have to make the rules. When I think of people who write fantasy and sci-fi, I am just in awe because of all the things you have to come up with for your world to work. And so for me, I know the sun sets in the west, and I know how money is used, and I know like basically what the clothes are going to look like. So for me, it's definitely a lot easier because I focus more on like the characters and the banter and things like that. And so I don't have to stress so much about what the world is.
So, you know what's funny is that you said it was easier, and I feel like so part of the reason I write contemporary fantasy is I'm like, oh, it'll be set in the real world and that'll be so much easier. And then I always find myself doing all this research about real world stuff anyway. I do think though, like you touched on the fact that like you know the rules of the world essentially, and I think that is the big difference is that in speculative settings, you not only need to come up with those rules, but you need to establish those rules for the reader. Whereas in a real world setting, you may need to do that somewhat because your reader may not be familiar with the particular place or culture or whatever it is that you're drawing on. But you probably don't need to do quite as much of it. So you're going to maybe be doing more description and things like that, as opposed to setting up, here's how the world works.
Yes.
Good point.
I think a lot of it too, for the speculative side, and obviously coming from a fantasy side, is the way to make it easy or make it easier, and it depends on how complex or how deep you want to go, is make it make sense for the story itself and the plot itself. You mentioned money. Like, money in my fantasy world works the same as it does here. Well, maybe not right now, but the same as it did here. You know, gold still has a weight price. Silver still has a weight price. Precious metals still have that weight price. I just get to call them something a little different. It's a gold whatever as compared to, you know, a gold dollar. It's still like that. Or, you know, you talk about, I was writing one the other day, and I said that this guy who was a high-ranking person in this particular mercenary company, he had this really fancy linen from whatever country I used, and it's on my map, so that's why. And so it's like, just to establish that, oh wow, they must be known for luxury goods or something like that. So you're building that based on what makes sense for your story as well, because we know if we say I guess, what was it back at Alonso, you know, like, you know, you go back to the Silk Road and you talk about Ming porcelain. You knew that was the high end stuff, and contemporaries would try to fake it and all these things. So you're kind of given that reference point there. So as long for world building with speculative, and also just especially with fantasy and science fiction, as long as it's making sense and it's logical, then you're to your story. You know, if you can explain it, oh, okay, cool, that works. You know, I'm pacified. I can move on to the rest of the story now without breaking my head. Like, maybe that's one reason why I'll never mess with time travel, because it just gives me a headache too much. So,
Darío, is there anything you want to add about those key differences?
Okay, well, I agree with everything everyone has said, but also I would like to add, for example, when I create something in the real world, I normally like to put the culture thing on the spotlight. Again, for example, Latin dancing. In Latin dancing, I try to create this reality for Latin America based on video games, for my love of video games. But at the same time, I like to create something new. For example, on Brigade EXT, and sports novel I wrote, I like to say, okay, these guys want to go to the Olympics. The Olympics are a real event. But also, I like to add that they are in this fantastic school and they go to these amazing stadiums with all the technology. It's not that far reality with now all the technology, but also you create your own world and your own rules, as everyone has said. And also, I think in mixing these things, I was inspired mainly by superhero movies, by Disney movies, when you can put things that exist in real life, but also mixing them with something new, with your own rules. It's really amazing. So that's what I like on creating these worlds. Also, I think, for example, when you say how things differ in the real world and the fantasy world, mainly in the fantasy world, you can create everything. In the real world, you have to establish all the things that have been established in the past. And also, again, you can mix these things but also give a new perspective. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I suppose maybe to sum that up a bit, I suppose it kind of comes back to, you know, the old iceberg theory of world building about what's visible and everything that implies underneath the waterline. And I guess that being in a real world setting makes that visible part of the iceberg all the more powerful, because everything that's underlying is so well known, that unless you are pointing it out and targeting whatever an element for changing specifically, then you know, it creates a very powerful shorthand, I suppose, in that respect for world building. So that's super cool. But it does then, super smooth segue, by the way, it does lead to the question then, how important is it to be accurate in those descriptions of real world elements, of the elements that people do know, as opposed to the things that you're targeting potentially to change? How important is that accuracy?
I mean, that's extremely important in my opinion, because, and E kind of touched on it earlier when she said about the research that comes about through that, because when you're writing something with real world settings, which I did in the past, wrote some in the past, kind of just a story of a kid, but he got tricked into joining up the French Foreign Legion right before World War I. And so I had to kind of do a lot of research, not only into the French Foreign Legion, but also into the where that particular camp was stationed, and where they were, and then looking at it from that aspect of what was the world like at that time, what was that area like at that time, what were the, you know, just so many intricacies of that it was daunting, because of the fact of how much, and I am like, that's my training, that's my education, is history, and how much of that went into it. It was a huge undertaking just for like a really short novella.
I mean, the Légion étrangère is a really fascinating thing that still exists today, by the way, and it's absolutely incredible setting. Anybody else, sorry, on the subject?
Yeah, so I have an example from a different author, actually. So Rachel Lynn Solomon's fantastic YA contemporary, Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, which is like a Rivals to Lovers. It's so good. And so it takes place, as I recall, in Seattle, and like she's like from Seattle, and so she has an author's note at the start of the book that's like, okay, so if you're from Seattle, you might notice that there are some things in this book that are not there anymore, but I really, really wanted to send these characters to these places that I went as a teenager, so just go with it. And I loved that. I loved that she was like, okay, this is a real world setting and it's a contemporary novel. I'm not setting it when I grew up, but I still want these kids to go to these places. So like, we're just gonna have this fun little ride together. Which I thought was just kind of a nice way of dealing with that, where like, especially for somewhere that like you've lived or that you've been, but it's changed since then, and you still want to use those things, to just have an author's note and be like, okay, I know this is not accurate anymore, but it was accurate at some point, so like just go with it. So I just love that. I thought of that, I think, like almost first thing when I saw this question ahead of time was that book and that author. I do think it's important to accurately describe real world settings, but at the same time, if you just think about things in TV that like everybody thinks works, like cop dramas are so guilty of this, with the, you know, the like, you've got the very pixelated picture and they're just like enhance and just yelling enhance at the computer, and the picture magically gets like way bigger, and you know, and like fingerprints like are like a, you know, a whole thing. Like there are so many things, and probably people who like live in a certain place or work in a certain field or whatever are going to be reading like, yeah, that's not how this works. But I think for the average reader, it's also kind of a case of like stranger than fiction. So like the musical Come From Away, which is about planes that got stranded in Canada when the attack on the Twin Towers happened. And so it's like about 9/11, but like not about 9/11, because it really has very little to do with like what was happening, you know, and it's about these people getting stranded. And so some of the things in that play people will be like, oh, it's so unrealistic. Like 2 people fall in love over the course of like, I don't know, 3 days or something, and they get married. And those people really fell in love and got married. And I guess the person who wrote the play was like, actually, there were even more stories that I just thought that if I included them, nobody would believe. So on one hand, it is important to be accurate, but on the other hand, you can almost be accurate to a point where like people no longer, like in my debut, she lives at like an old folks home, and she checks herself out, and I had to add a line before publication that was like, because she had checked beforehand and made sure she could check herself out, because all the beta readers were like, I don't know, would a resident be able to check themselves out? And I was like, yes, I literally looked into it. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. If they have like dementia and their family put them into a home, maybe not. But I was like, for just, for an adult who needs that extra assistance living in old age, but like she checked herself into a home, yes, she can check herself out, but like nobody believed that. And so I had to like add a line being like, yes, this is really how it works. So it's like kind of weirdly like you need to be accurate, but if you're too accurate, you might actually like lose the readers again because they don't believe that things work that way.
Those are amazing examples for all sorts of points. I'm not going to get into, but I absolutely love them. Who haven't we heard from you? I think Ronni or Darío?
Well, again, I think accurately describing the real world in your fictional setting is really great. But for example, in one movie that I really love, for example, The Dark Knight of Christopher Nolan, I really like it how he mixed the heightened fantasy or reality of Batman with a real world setting and real world problems. For example, the corruption, the violence. And how can people relate to that because they live that every day? For example, when I created Hurricanes 2007, I was inspired by The Dark Knight because right now, as you know, and the news said, Mexico is having a security problem. But I wanted to create also a fiction story with natural disasters, such like the day after tomorrow, and also mixing them with action, like The Dark Knight, and another Mexican movie that I really recommend you that more or less describes the situation that we are living in. Not that hard for everyone. It's called El Infierno, Hell. And I try to relate these 3 things. And again, creating a new world based on our world. Other example, 28 Days Later. I really got scared watching that movie as an 11-year-old kid back in 2009. But it's a great movie because you see London deserted. It's a real world setting, but with zombies. And I was shocked because I told myself, oh my God, I have never seen London deserted. I have never seen this kind of zombies because they had these red eyes, and I was really scared because I said, oh my God, this is really scary, but this is a very interesting story. So I know it's very contradicting, but honestly, I was inspired. Again, other story, for example, on Latin dancing, again, returning for my novel. I was inspired in Sword Art Online, and I was inspired also in video games. And I told myself, how about if I mix this genre with my Latin culture, with my music, with the music I grew up with, singers like Belanova, like Vicente Fernandez, like, every Latino singer, no? You can Google it, and there are many, many, many. That's why I wanted to create that. And they are real singers, they are real things, but you mix this with this heightened reality, like Sword Online, when you enter the video game and you play inside the video game. So it's a new narrative, but at the same time, you are accurately describing things. In Latin dancing, I really wanted to showcase all the Latin cultures. Mexican culture is not the same as Colombian culture, Ecuadorian culture, Brazilian culture. I wanted to put this difference, but in a fun way. Okay, for example, the first level is going to be based on Brasilia. The second level is going to be based on Mexico City, where I grew up. The third one is going to be based on Argentina. And that's the thing you can teach the people who doesn't know about Latin culture. You teach them okay, this is really amazing, and you're creating a new narrative because it's very fun. So honestly, accuracy is very important when you're writing these stories. Another story, for example, sorry because I'm a little bit
We've got
lagging.
plenty of time, don't worry.
On Codicemex. Codicemex, I recently wrote that book. Codicemex is based on my childhood growing on Iztapalapa. I grew up in Iztapalapa, Patlaco, for many years, and I wanted to showcase the Mexican culture, and not the Mexican culture you see on the TV that always puts us on the security problems. No, I wanted to showcase the other part. In hurricanes, I wanted to put you the security problem. Okay. But in Codice MX, I wanted to put you this amazing thing about Mexican culture, how our traditions are great, how are many things that I really love about my culture, but also mixing them inspired, I mean, by movies of Guardians of the Galaxy. I was inspired by Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor, also Black Panther. I really love Black Panther. Recently, when the sequel of Wakanda Forever came up, I really love it that Namor was inspired on our pre-Hispanic culture. I really was amazed because I always wanted to see that on a movie. And in a Marvel movie, that because I'm a very big fan of superhero movies, uh, I was very excited. So that is the main example that you can create something new in your real world, and many people are going to relate. Yeah, there are going to be some inaccuracies, obviously, but at the end of the day, people are going to appreciate that. I think when you create something with sincerity, it's going to be very, very great for everyone to see. Okay, I'm seeing represented myself on the screen, and honestly, it's nice. So that's my answer.
Yeah, then thank you very much for it. Ronni, did you want to add anything on the subject?
Yeah, so accuracy. So what I do is I make up, so the world is kind of made up. So it's a made up setting. It's someone told me that it reminded them of Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls. And I feel like that's kind of what I'm going for, is this, it's a real world setting, but it's not in a real world. And so I have my own rules. No, I don't have to worry about people saying, wait, no, you can't get to here from there in 20 minutes, because I made it up and I can make it do whatever I want. So I think that that helps with the accuracy. With that said, I do have a few like real world things peppered in. Like I might throw in like a popular singer or something like that we know, or they might use Instagram or whatever. But most of the things that they really are in contact with are things I made up. Like the video games are made up. The song, the conventions they go to are made up. And I just do that so that I can avoid people picking on me about accuracy, but also it's fun for me to like create these like fun little elements in these worlds that are real. And because I am not so worried again about the rules of how the world works, I can focus on these like really cute little details. And so that is how I am. I mean, I really think that the accuracy depends on the story you're trying to tell and your audience, and how that works with your characters and everything. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, that's an excellent one it is. I suppose that what I'm hearing from everybody as well there is that, at some point there's, bits that you choose to rely on, real world setting elements, and then specific elements that are chosen to be changed and are then, the source of effectively what's creative and what is different and might be speculative about what you're writing, which means that obviously when you have those two elements, there has to be a balance between the two. Where do you think that balance lies, as a bit of a corollary to our last question?
Oh, I think the balance has to lie in, especially for, and I'm speaking from a contemporary real world point of view. I remember reading books back in the early aughts where it was just a lot of like blind spot name dropping. And I feel like if you overuse a lot of the accurate real world stuff, it can get jarring for the reader, and it can date the book, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But it could, um, Yeah, I think you got to find that balance between like not being so picky, but also not being so out there, I think. Trying to get the words, words. I'm a writer. I should know these words.
That's what we do.
I mean, but I still, again, I remember like reading these books and kind of like rolling my eyes, like, okay, I know you're talking about so and so, you're talking about this franchise, wah, wah, wah. But also, but I also think too, like sometimes when you use real world stuff, it could age badly. Where, books that talked about like a certain beloved figure, well, you find out that figure is problematic, and then the book comes out, and all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, this sucks.
Right.
So, I think that's another reason why I like to make things up, because it feels safer and they're not going to turn problematic unless I make them problematic. So yeah, I think just finding that balance between how much you take from the real world and how much you make up, and making it more like maybe like a slight wink nudge as opposed to like a really obvious and obnoxious wink nudge.
I love that. For people who might be listening on audio, you're missing out. So anybody else on that balance?
I think in fantasy, there's a little bit more leeway to go more creative as opposed to accuracy. Again, as long as it all makes sense for your plot and your story. If you're building the world and you're getting a little creative, you can make it make sense. And a lot of fantasy, and I've mentioned this in previous panels in previous years, and even last week in last week's panel. The secret is magic. Magic makes everything work. And that's always that one fun thing. But yeah, I mean, in a way, you can kind of be more creative on the fantasy side, as long as it works, as long as it doesn't pull the reader out of that immersion that you're trying to welcome them in. And you get to make up a lot more of those things. So you get to make up, who are the influential figures, or who are the, what is the fun games that they play, and you get to create all of that. Now, what would that come from? It has to probably come from a real world idea somewhere along the line, but then you get to kind of tweak it to where it makes your story work or your world work or that much better with it. So in the realm of fantasy, the balance kind of the scales do tip towards creativity more than they do accuracy, I feel.
That sounds very fair enough. E or Darío?
Again, I agree with what Ronni and Joseph had said. Honestly, magic, first of all, when you're creating these things. Second, you have to be very careful of not creating something that many people are not going to be relating, because at the end of the day, you want people to relate to the story. On my case, when I balance these things, again, I normally try to put these things in a fantastic way. For example, again, on Latin dancing, I was inspired on my childhood series, such as Victorious, Soy 101, iCarly, that are technically on real world at the end of the day, but they have these comedy things also. And I wanted to incorporate that, but in a more not so comedy, but at the end of the day, more accurate to the situation. A Mexican is not going to have the same personality traits as a Colombian, as an Argentinian. So we have these things that make us different, but at the same time make us united. So balancing these things is, again, something hard, something sometimes hard, but it's very rewarding. I have many friends from many parts of Latin America, and I wanted to ask them, okay, this is a correct characterization. It's not, tell me, I want to do that. But at the same time, I wanted to create my own thing. For example, if you have seen telenovelas, or you have the opportunity to see, normally the handsome guy or the pretty girl are normally these elegant, talking, this a little bit of arrogant, no? In my case on Latin dancing, I wanted to create a friend that is really nice, but is very also arrogant sometimes. I don't know if you have seen The Princess of the Frog, the Charlotte character with Tiana. The Charlotte character is very arrogant, very spoiled sometimes, but it's very, very nice to Tiana. So I wanted to have this spin of my characters on these personality traits. Other example on these real world and fantasy things, there is a tradition in Latin America, or at least in Mexico, we celebrate a lot. It's the Día de los Reyes Magos, the Three Wise Men Day, the Three Kings Day. It's a very fun tradition because it's similar to Santa Claus and Christmas, but it's on January 5th. And this is a real tradition that every January 6th, we bake a rosca de reyes, that is a kind of bread. And if you get some toy, you're going to do the tamales on the February 2nd. And I wanted to create a new world based on this story. The Three Wise Men, I wanted to create a new spin on the story by putting them like young. They are the three wise young men. They are young, they can relate to the young people, but also have these adventures, these fantasy adventures like the Lord of the Rings, like Harry Potter, again, like Star Wars, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Sorry if I say many, many examples of movies, because I really love movies. And normally all my work is based on this love for many, many different movies. So again, you are describing a real world situation, this tradition that is real, and many people celebrate it. I celebrated a lot when I was a kid, and normally I still do. But you are creating something new that is related to fantasy. I don't know if you have seen Willow. I wanted also to put this spin with the Three Wise Young Men based on Willow and other fantasy movies that you have seen in the past, but creating something for Latin America, for the world. I normally want, when I balance these things, when I write, I normally want people to understand it on the Latin part, or also I want these stories to be universal for everyone. You don't have to be a Latino to understand it. It's only a matter of fact that you connect with the characters and how relate with you. That's my opinion.
What do you have anything to add there? I saw you wanted to speak earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to say, coming from, because I like write speculative fiction, but set in more or less real world settings. So my upcoming novel, The Keeper of Lonely Spirits, which releases in 2025, is set in Northwest Ohio. And the magic is it's like ghosts, and then the main character's cursed with immortality, and also he can talk to plants. So less, a little less magic and a little less open magic than my debut. So it takes place in Northwest Ohio, which is a real region, and I can confirm that because I live here. And but it takes place in a fictional town because I just needed the town. Like, I just wanted to be able to, have it laid out whatever way I wanted. Whatever buildings I needed there to be historically, I wanted them to be there. Kind of the backstory of the town and the backstory of the antagonist and stuff. I wanted to be able to do that. So for the sake of having the world laid out a certain way, I just invented a town, but then within that invention, like, everything is accurate to Northwest Ohio. So there are all the real plants and birds, and partially the story takes place during the first 2 weeks of May, which if you are a birder in the United States, is the biggest week in American birding. So I worked that in there. I was like, yep, a bunch of people just came into town because it's Northwest Ohio and it's warbler season, and like just things like that. Like all these, there's a lot of like real Northwest Ohio history in there. And so like the town is fictional, and there's also like a fictional river, which is ridiculous because we have so many real bodies of water, and I still went for a fictional one. But everything that went into building this fictional town in a real region is very real and as accurate as I was able to make it. So it kind of hits that balance where like the accuracy allows you to be creative in a way where like beta readers literally would ask me all the time, like, is that a real town? And I'd have to be like, no, I made it up. It's not a real, I double checked that there is no town in Ohio with this name.
Hey,
So-
E, is Cedar Point making an appearance in your in
Actually,
your books
no.
at all?
Actually, no, because I'm not. I'm from Michigan originally, and I don't like aside here real quick. I'm from Michigan originally, so I'm not supposed to like it in Ohio, but I do anyway. And I'm not a writer, and I tend to just forget about Cedar Point for long stretches of time because I just don't care. It's but no, we're so that's further east actually. So also there's that is just
Okay.
so now I'm like, oh, is this an oversight? Maybe I should just have the kids reference like, oh man, we missed going to Cedar Point this summer because of all the ghosts and stuff.
That would be cool, actually.
I still have time. It could happen. I'm seriously considering this now.
And now we've circled back around to the cartography, which is awesome. But well, it's something everybody mentioned there at various degrees was research. And it's funny that you're talking about movies, because one of my favorite things about being a writer is that you can watch all the movies you want, and you're not actually just watching movies. You're doing research for your books, obviously, being a speculative fiction writer. So it's almost like a tax write-off in terms of time. But when it comes to research, I suppose there are two main questions. One, what do you research? What elements or what aspects of the environment is it good to, or is it most useful to dig into? And as a side note as well, but it could be a very practical, useful one, how do you research? What tools maybe do you use? Have you found useful? I know, I couldn't have written the books I've written without Google Maps, for instance, even though it's not, it doesn't give you everything. It's pretty damn useful. And a lot of writers not that long ago would have killed to be able to have Google Maps like we have today for research. But yeah, so any useful tools and tips on top of sort of what areas, what aspects of a real life environment are most important to research?
Yeah, if I can, I'm gonna dive
Of course,
right in.
go for it.
So for my upcoming book, even though I live here and I love going out and identifying plants and birds and things, I had like spreadsheets of just like what plants are flowering when in this region, and what trees this was harder, but like what trees would maybe be growing together in a forest, and things like that. So I did a lot of that, which I admit was half for my own enjoyment because I just like plants, and I was like, yeah, let's research some plants. I also I knew a lot of Northwest Ohio history after taking a class in college because, like, again, I'm not from here, so like I didn't grow up learning a Northwest Ohio history, although it's fairly similar to Michigan history, so that was okay. But doubling back and like looking back at the Northwest Ohio history, particularly in the region of the Great Black Swamp, Northwest Ohio, and just looking at that because that heavily influenced like the whole arc of the story and the whole trajectory of the story, as well as just how the town is laid out and what buildings there are and what they used to be and things like that. So that was part of it, was the history, the flora and fauna. I have previously, it's trunked, but I have previously written a story that was partially set in the city I actually live in, and I was on Google Maps like, oh shit, I actually don't know how downtown is laid out. I actually don't know where this building is. I really thought, I was like, oh, I'll just set it in my city and then I won't have to research all these things. And then like every other second I was on Google Maps, like, just kidding. Turns out I have to research my own city even more. Yeah, definitely Google Maps is a big help. Sometimes, so I used Google a lot. Now I've switched, I'm like moving away from Google things except for Google Maps, and Gmail. So now I use like DuckDuckGo and Firefox and whatnot. But when researching on any search engine, I think it's useful, but you have to be good. And I think, having grown up in the 90s, I think we were really taught this, and I think they don't teach this anymore because they assume like all the kids are, they're digital natives, they just know how to do computer stuff and we don't have to teach them anything, which is a soapbox for another time. But I think you have to be good at really like sifting through. You're going to get millions of results for pretty much anything, so you have to be good at sifting through and looking for things. Like I've been working on a cozy mystery, and it involves a lighthouse, and like I found, so aside from like writings from recent lighthouse keepers, I also found like a handbook for light keepers from like 1912 or something, and I was like, awesome, okay. So you can find some really good like primary source kind of stuff. But it's just a matter of being willing to sift through like many layers of just junk, and then also trying to determine you know, which things, like when someone is giving you facts in like a blog post, like do they cite any sources, or do they give their credentials as an expert, or are they just kind of saying things and you have no idea where they learned that? So I think the internet can be a great resource, but you really need to like learn those research skills to help you, you know, find the best sources, really.
Thank you for that. And if we're dropping search engine names, I will add Ecosia, which I use because we're talking about trees, and that one helps plant them at least a bit. So there you go. Ronni, Joseph, or Darío?
Yeah. I mean, I was just gonna say that
Feel free to jump in.
yeah, with searching, I mean, I have to like really agree with E on that. And then going back and, you know, I remember in the older days going back to the libraries and things like that, card catalogs, and having to look up whatever you can, whatever might be even dated now, probably already disproven. I think the biggest thing, you know, for me with research has always just been read as much as you can. Just get as much, like when I was going for my master's in history, yeah, the primary sources, secondary sources were all valuable. But yeah, you had to look at the credentials of how they were writing it, what they were writing, who they were writing it for, who paid them to write it, even. There was a lot. I remember doing papers on the quasi war between the United States and France, and the aspect was a lot of the secondary sources you were getting were from newspaper journalists who were writing sensationalized stories that really had no bearings on what was really going on, things like that. So yeah, you just have to really sift through a lot of it. There's so much in archives if you really want to get down to the bare roots of everything. And just whatever you can find, whatever you can research, and then just go from there. You know, observation too, depending on if you're in a town and you're writing about that town and you actually live in that town, you know, what does it actually look like? Have you ever actually, you know, really observed through that lens? And then, you know, kind of, because I can observe and I'll do it. I hate that it happens to me, and I'm sure it happens to a lot of people, but you're like, I'm going to observe. I'm really going to take a look because I want to see how people are talking. I really want to see what the people are wearing because I want to incorporate that. And then like 10 minutes later, you've totally lost your train of thought of everything. And you're just like in the mix of something else. So you're like, oh crap, I failed. So, you know, just, yeah, observe it and read, and just try to find the best sources you can find, as hard as that might be.
For me, since my books are typically set in a high school or a town, like When the Stars Lead to You set in a private school. So I went on the Phillips Exeter Academy website to see like, how does this private school work? How do they accept students in? How do students, like scholarship students, my character's a scholarship student, like how do they get that award? Like what is their like criteria? What kind of classes do they offer? What the schedule looks like? Is it a day school? Is it a boarding school? So yeah, I had to really research that, which was a lot of fun for me. And then, and This Night Is Ours, they went to a public school, so I had to research. Like I actually went and looked up things like what is this high school's lunch menu for today, and when do they have their activities, and what teachers teach what, and do they call them this, or do they say Mr.? Do they call them by their first names? Do they call them Professor? So like researching and then like picking the things I like the best to create my own realities in these worlds was part of it. Another part of research that I did too, because again, like I like I know the region in general, even though it never says, so it's kind of like a northeastern region of the country. So I like had to research like the seasons, like when they get snow or when the leaves start to change. And there's such inconsequential things that look like in the story, because like the character just mentions it kind of fleetingly, like, oh, I hate when it snows the day before Thanksgiving, but it's still something that I had to make sure was a thing that really happened in that world. And also, again, like having to research like what the architecture looks like. So maybe the school has like, I can't have it have a Adobe style when it's set in a place that might be Connecticut. So like looking at the architecture, looking at the houses, thinking of how the neighborhoods look. Um, so all of those things were just like research things that I really had a lot of fun doing, but it helped inform what I made up about my world instead of me kind of taking it like word for word. So I helped inform that to make it still feel really lived in and really real.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Darío, did you want to add anything there?
Yes, on my case, I really want to thank my mom and all my community that I grew up, because we were so diverse that I can tell you how impacted that on my works. Again, in the Latin dancing example, I grew up with Mexican programs, with Colombian programs, with Chilean programs. There was a Chilean program that I really loved as a kid called 31 Minutos. It was a puppet show with Latin aspects that it was very fun. I recommend you to go to check it out. And also, when I describe these things, this real life environment, again, taking again what Ronni says, on my case, high schools in Mexico City are really different from the American ones that you see on TV. So when I remember I was watching Victorious back in early 2011, I was 13 years old, and I remember thinking the school was going to be the same as the Victorious one. But no, obviously no. When I arrived on my school, it was very different. We didn't have lockers. We didn't have these your classes like the series or in Sony 101 that you have these dormitories. No. It's very different, obviously. But that things I wanted to incorporate that on my work. In the new book that I wrote, Codicemex, basically I describe how was my life in Apatlaco, Iztapalapa, how was my life in Militar Marte, Iztacalco, and La Colonia del Valle. These three things, these three places are very different when I saw it as a kid, and now I see it. Apatlaco was more of a popular town. We have these tianguis markets on the streets. We have this Mexican culture everywhere. And then we have the Militar Marte that was kind of like an American suburb, more quiet, more relaxing. It was very different. And in La Colonia del Valle, we have now this mixing between American culture and Mexican culture, because there are many now Americans living here in La Colonia del Valle and Benito Juarez. And you see the difference, how Iztapalapa is very different to this place, and it's in the same city. It's the same city, but there are many different places. Again, other thing, for example, again, in the Three Wise Men. The Three Wise Men, I wanted to showcase my tradition, the Three Kings Day, but also I wanted to incorporate things that from other parts of the world. For example, in the second part of my novel, I wanted to incorporate Sneguroshka. That is the maiden, the snow maiden. The Frozen was inspired in that myth, that this girl brings gifts to the children in Russia. So I wanted to incorporate that in my world of the Three Wise Men and say, okay, we can mix these things. At the end of the day, they are gift bringers like Santa Claus. So how about if we can put the Russian thing, the American thing? For example, another character that I was inspired was the Tomte character. That is an elf, a magic elf from Norway and Iceland, and you mix this with your Latin culture, is really great, no? Also, in the Three Wise Men, I wanted to showcase the nationalities of the Wise Men. based on the Bible, the three wise men came from the Middle Eastern world, the African world, and the European world. So I wanted to showcase on my fantasy world called La Ciudadela, the Citadel, how do we mix our Latin culture with the Arab culture, with the European and the African, and you have this mix of cultures that are very respectful, but also you are creating something new. Again, on another example, on Hurricanes 2007, it was more inspired again by the action, by the Christopher Nolan movies, more realistic. And I showcase the Mexico world as a place that you have two different realities. The one, again, I said it's very warm, very hopeful, and we have many great things. And the other part that is a dark world that right now we're living with insecurity problems and the narco traffic and everything, no? But I wanted to also add some American characters and also Asian characters and other parts of the world, because it's very nice to see heroes and villains from many parts of the world, but not falling in the stereotypes. I think it's another question about stereotypes. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more about on that question. And other example in Latin Dancing, The Truest Men, Hurricanes, on Brigade XT. In Brigade XT, I wanted to showcase again the stadiums, the sports feeling on the Olympics. I really love the Olympics. I had the opportunity to train swimming since I was a kid, and also to run, to do many sports. And I wanted to showcase how is to be a real athlete. I don't know if you have seen the movie Goal. It's a very inspiring movie. I recommend you. It's about a Mexican boy that wants to go to play football on England, on Newcastle United, and I was really inspired as a kid for that movie, because this guy is an immigrant. He wants to play football, and at the end of the day, he gets his dream. And on Brigade XT, I wanted to incorporate that, how it feels to be an athlete, and how can you relate to that athlete, but also mixing them with the high school tropes of my Nickelodeon shows that I really love, like Victorious, like Soy 101. Also, like, I don't know if you have seen the series about well, there are many other shows of sports, like Coach Carter, for example, from Samuel L. Jackson. That movie inspired me. So you mix these things with the real life environment, and you create something new. On Brigade XT, again, I wanted to showcase not only my Mexican character, but also the Japanese one, the American one, the French one, and from other parts of the world. At the end of the day, the athletes come from many parts of the world, no? So it's really nice to see you represented, but at the same time, being very respectful. Yeah, that's my opinion.
And that's the crucial bit. What you were saying before, and you were talking about, you know, some of your other works where, you know, you had like the video game in the different countries, you know, for different levels and chapters. I think that is something we've all encountered. In This Is the Good Part, for instance, just behind me there. You know, I start out sort of like you were saying earlier, reminding me of that, you know, in basically secure retirement home / digital asylum, and what they've done there. And then, you know, the whole first act is an escape from there, and then it ends up in somewhere that I know. I mean, I've lived in the Andes, but I'm not, you know, I can't claim that to be, you know, directly part of my own identity, which was Mitad del Mundo, and just outside Quito. So in that case, I called on what I'm sure we all do, which is sensitivity readers, which is sort of what you'd said. So in that aspect, I think I'm going to just tie together the last two questions there. What do you think are the dangers or pitfalls that we need to avoid when we're using real life world building? And one of the biggest ones of those, obviously, is that line between, like you said, Darío, the richness of multiple cultures, multiple elements coming together, but also the danger of crossing into cultural appropriation. So one last round there for everybody on that subject.
Okay,
Jump
well,
in. Yeah,
I'm going to say this on the stereotyping. On my case, would you have seen Mexican media, how we are protected with sombreros, with tacos, with maracas, and we're dancing every day, and we have these great mustaches. But no, not everyone we have these mustaches. We don't have these sombreros. Or no, we don't have the maracas. We don't have the cactus. Not everything is desert. I don't know if you have seen Breaking Bad. In Breaking Bad, we have this, every Mexican guy is corrupt. No, we're not like that. Also that I really like this, but also I laugh mainly. In Man on Fire, the Denzel Washington movie that is really great. It's had great action. I remember watching as a kid, and I said, okay, Denzel Washington wants to save this girl, but every 5 minutes there's a Mexican guy trying to kidnap the girl in Mexico City. And I said, oh my God, I have been to those places, and sorry, but not, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. And I said, well, it's a movie, doesn't matter. But if you reflect later, you said, okay, there are many stereotypes about us. Other example, in the recent movie of Blue Beetle, in the Blue Beetle movie, that they had this Latino representation, honestly, I have a mixed feeling about this movie because I really liked the Xolo Maridueña performance because he was very sincere. And we have these Mexican supporting actors, Damian Alcázar, Elpidia Carrillo, and Adriana Barraza, and the other Mexican American kids. I really like it because it was sincere, but at the same time, I didn't like it because we had again the same stereotypes. Again, the abuelita was from the revolution, la revolución. We had again this stereotypical house with your typical faith things like the Virgen de Guadalupe. Honestly, that is correct. I have a Virgen de Guadalupe showcase here in my room, but at the same time we don't have other things like ay mijito, cómo se siente tú, o sea, those things I thought they were a little bit of stereotype, but at the end of the day it wasn't their fault. They were really trying, so I wasn't mad about that. Other people, honestly, they were a little bit mad because again, in the movie they swear a lot, but swear a lot. They said many Spanish words that are really, 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 really ugly. And I said, my mom didn't talk me like that when I was a kid. For example, sorry about this for the swearing in Spanish. Hey, pendejo, ¿cómo estás? Sorry, but my mom didn't talk me like that when I was a kid. She always told me, hijito, you are really great. You are going to be great. But in the movie, I was watching the Damián Alcázar character to Xolo Maridueña. No seamos hijos de quién sabe qué, de la chingada. O sea, and I told myself, no, we don't speak like that every time. But also, I'm going to tell you, Jay, Ronnie, Joseph, Ian, in Mexican media, we also fall sometimes for that stereotype. In this case, in the telenovelas, we always have this white guy with blue eyes that is the main character, and the mestizo one, it's always being the thief or the bad guy. Tenoch Huerta, I remember saying in the I remember him saying in the Black Panther press conference that, and that's a real story. Tenoch Huerta, we know him playing as a very famous, I don't like that topic of the narco story. He played a narco. And I really didn't like that because, okay, we are stereotyping again, and we are portraying us as a drug dealer. So I didn't like that. But when Tenoch Huerta said in the Black Panther conference, he said, I really wanted to be a superhero so many people can look to us and say, okay, we're from the same skin, from the same culture, but we are superheroes also. The actress that played Namora, Mabel Cadena. Mabel Cadena also said that in Mexican media, she was always portrayed as a drug dealer or as a thief, and that was stereotyping. So, for finishing this, I think if you stereotype, it's okay. No, it's not okay, because you can really research now. We have many different tools to learn all more cultures, and at the end of the day, you can create a character based on their culture, but respectful. You don't have to be like, okay, he's Mexican, he's going to have this abuelita, he's going to have this tío. No, no. Or the American one, he's always going to have this hamburger, or he's going to also be surfing on the beach. No, no, sorry, but no. There are many kind of ways of telling a story without stereotyping. For example, I don't know if you have seen the American in the new movie American Fiction. I think it's with Jeffrey Wright. It was nominated for an Oscar recently. Again, we stereotype that you come from the hood, and not everyone comes from the hood. Apatlaco, for example, on my case, technically is the hood because it's a marginalized place in Mexico City. But when I was a kid, and I still feel it, I think Apatlaco is like a city like everyone else, has its problems, but it's not like the media also always says you come from the hood and it's very dangerous. No, not everyone. So honestly, I think we have to stop this stereotyping. We have to be more respectful. But if you have, and if at the end of the day you have these a little bit mistakes about the culture, don't worry. Many people are going to appreciate your effort. So you don't have to worry. You have to create a thing that really it's really respectful. That's my opinion.
And that's an interesting point, because stereotypes are one side, but also where that's coming from is where the interfaces with cultural appropriation, as in who is claiming to be able to represent something, and on what basis are they representing something. And then even more so, obviously, if that's feeding into stereotypes, that's feeding into negative imagery, then that's just about the one of the worst things ever. Who wants to hop in there?
Yeah. So definitely going off of what Darío said, and you, Jay, I think it's really important for authors who have good intentions. You have to think about your intent versus your impact. Whereas someone who may be like, hey, I'm going to tell this story of this disenfranchised people, their intentions might be good, but why are you assuming that these people can't tell their own story? So there is your intent versus your impact. What is your why? Like, why do you feel like you're the person to tell this story? And I think that appropriation can fall under people who, again, like say, I'm going to tell this story. And they're going to bring their biases to it. They're going to bring their everything. And this is not just like, because world building is not just your setting, it's also like your people and it's the culture in there. So they're going to bring their biases to this, and it's going to come out in a way that might be stereotypical or might be offensive. So I think this is, it's like your why. Like, why are you assuming they can't tell their own stories? Why are you assuming they don't know their land or their world as much as you might think because you looked on Wikipedia? So I think that's one of the major pitfalls to avoid, is to like, don't assume that you know everything. And this isn't even like, it doesn't just cover cultural appropriation, this covers everything in your writing. Like, don't assume, like E was saying, like she was gonna write the story about the town, but she still had to research the town. So like kind of assuming and thinking you already know everything, and really not thinking about like the impact of what it's going to have on these cultures that you are representing. Even if it's a fantasy made up race that still may feel coded by a real world race, like really having to really think about those things, and also just asking yourself, am I the right person to tell this story? So those are like my feelings about all of that. I have a lot of feelings about it. So
And rightfully so, and absolutely crucial points. Thank you. EM or Joseph?
Yeah, I think that you know, you definitely have to. I love what Ronni said about the intent. You know, you really have to kind of look within yourself as to why you want to bring it out, bring certain stories, certain aspects of that story or of a culture, real world culture. I know for me, for the one that's coming out, the one, I guess it's for me, it's over here. It might be over here for you guys. The Dark Empress. This is the first book that I've written that I don't feel I played it safe, because when writing fantasy, especially epic or high fantasy, it's always geared towards the Norse Anglo-Saxon influences from you. That's just the way that writers have done it for 100 years for fantasy. And my culture of what I grew up was, my mother is Mexican American. My father is, I mean, we always just say like Anglo, but he's like pretty much anything like North Germanic, France, up to the British Isles and all that area. So, but his family had been in North Carolina since, I don't know, 1600s. You know, mom's family had been in Texas and northern Mexico since, I don't know, I guess civilization began there, you know, so to speak. I mean, they've been there before the colonial days. So for us, there was always this melting pot in our house. You know, we celebrate all these different holidays and all these different cultures. We have all these different things. My mother has less so over the years, but still calls me mijito, because I'm still her little baby, as she says. So I'm still mijito. And Thomas, my older brother, is mijo, because he's the older one. He's the bigger one. You know, we have the, you know, Virgin de Guadalupe. You know, my wife being Mexican descent, first generation, born in the United States. Her parents both born in Mexico. Also, same culture, but it's totally different because she was born and raised in Los Angeles. My mother was born and raised in South Central Texas. So it's very different cultures even for that. And even I can relate to what Darío is saying, but there's differences as well. So this book is the first one where I've incorporated what I knew of from my culture into this fantasy realm. But it's more of what my experiences were growing up with this Tex-Mex, not quite Chicano, because I'm not, but my mother is Chicano, but I'm not, type of aspect. So it's like what I saw from my mother, and the main character is less of what her mother is. So it's kind of like that whole representation, and then going back even further with my grandmothers, my abuelita, and their culture. But it's what was passed down, and that was a big theme of it, is what's been passed down over the years, from the culture aspect of what our experiences, the Samaniego family experiences are. Because I felt like I have been doing almost a disservice to them for not including them in my fantasy world as of yet. But I was very careful to do it based on what only I knew and what I felt and experienced, because that's the only thing I can speak to. I can't speak to what my wife's experiences are. I can't speak to what Darío's experiences are, but I can speak to what my experiences were growing up around our little community and culture of a Tex-Mex / American culture.
Yeah, so I mean, I think everybody has made some excellent points. So I feel like I don't have a ton to add on that. I will just say, so I think like in terms of writing from your own cultural background or from a place that you've lived or anything like that, I think so in addition to all of the normal world building that you are probably still going to be doing, and even if it's all based on your own experience, you are doing research, which again is something that I always fall, that's the trap I always fall into, where I'm like, oh, I'll just set this in a place that I lived for a long time or that I'm from or whatever, and then I don't have to do any research. And then I remember I have ADHD and I have terrible memory and I have to do lots of research actually. But is that when you are drawing on your own experiences and your own background and your own places that you've lived, really just kind of give something to the story. Like you have, because I think no matter how much research you do into a different culture or a different place that you've never lived, or you've like just vacationed there or something, I think you are never going to really, like, you are probably not the best person to write from that perspective, because you're never going to really get at the perspective, because you don't have that perspective. When you're writing from your own background, you have like, here's how I felt growing up this way, and here's how this shaped me. And so it just kind of comes out more naturally in the story, I think. And then actually, I thought when Ronni mentioned about the like questioning your why. So just recently at my day job, we had not exactly a training, but sort of some people at work get a training, and then they do roundtables for us on some different topics. And so this one is like building an inclusive classroom or more general just area. And so there was a whole part about language, and some of it was things like person first versus identity first language. But there was another kind of language that I am forgetting right now what it was called. But one of the examples they used that really stuck with me was if you see like an organization, like a community, or it's supposed to be a community organization, or it's a charitable organization's webpage, and are they saying things like, we're here to give a voice to the voiceless? Or are they saying things like, we're partnering with this community to like, essentially, are they viewing it as a charity case and we're here to help them? Or are you viewing yourself more as a partner with them and you're recognizing their own self-determination? And so I just thought of that when Ronni mentioned the like question your why, because right, like, why do you think that you need to be their voice? Why don't you think they can be their own voice? So just something to always consider. I thought that was an excellent point in particular by Ronni. Yeah. So just really thinking of that. And then again, like, I mean, it is okay to draw on your own experience. I know that we're writers and we're like, oh, but I want to be so creative. But like, you can be creative drawing on your own experience. Like, I wrote a book set in Northwest Ohio and there's ghosts, like, and I had a ton of fun writing it. And I think it's a really great book. Like, not to, like, I know we all have imposter syndrome, but really I'm like, no, this is a very good book though. I'm actually quite proud of it. So I mean, like you can still be creative, but still be respectful and be telling kind of your own story, even if it's not like a one-to-one, here's exactly what happened to me. It's kind of getting at that idea of write what you know, not meaning you need to only limit yourself to physical experiences you've literally actually had, but drawing on your own background and your own culture and your own things that you enjoy and your own emotional experiences and things like that, and then being creative within that without feeling a need to be like, oh, but it just won't be as creative if I'm not writing from someone else's culture. Like, I mean, why do you think that would be my first question for you would be like, why don't you just sit with yourself for a minute and just ask, why do you think that using this other culture is inherently more creative than writing from your own background?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we talk about cultural appropriation, obviously, and rightfully so, but like the crux of it, it seems almost like appropriating someone else's voice when that's their voice and they should be the one using it. So maybe we should talk about, like, I don't know, vocal appropriation or something like that. I don't know if there's a better term for it, but it's much more visceral than culture is visceral, but it's much more direct than that. I really wanted to thank you all. I mean, especially this last bit. I know we've overrun a little bit. Sorry for editor. Apologies, but I think it's definitely worth it. I mean, myself, I'm a first generation immigrant, so this is all stuff I could definitely relate to on, again, a very visceral level. And today, as chair of the international committee at SIFWA, Again, so we try to act to allow and to enable as many voices as possible all around the world publishing in English language markets. So I really just wanted to thank you all. AppStar again, editor, one last roundtable there. Pass around to tell us where we can find you, where people can get in touch with you, where they can find your books, what you have coming up, so on and so forth. And we're going to do it. I started in screen order, so I'm going to go the other way this time. Darío, if you want to kick us off, where can we find you and what do you have coming up?
Well, thank you again, J.R., A.M., Joseph, Ronni, again for the opportunity to talk about with you a little bit. Sorry again for the editor because we run a little bit, but you can find me on X, formerly Twitter, as Hurricane Darío. The nickname of Hurricane Darío comes from my love for wrestling, WWE wrestling, and also because my mom put me that nickname as a kid, Huracán Darío, or Hurricane Darío, I like it more. And all my books are in Spanish and English. We have many different stories for you. We have the rated R ones that are Hurricanes 207, and the family-friendly ones like Latin Dancing, Brigade EXT, Codice MX, that is new. And also, wait for more. We are going to have more stories. Right now, as a 26-year-old author, I'm going to tell you I'm very happy because as a kid, I wanted to create 5 sagas. And right now, yesterday I finished the last one. And I'm very proud because 5 stories, 20 books, 10 in Spanish, 10 in English. It's very, very, very hard, but at the same time rewarding. And again, follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, again, as Hurricane Darío. And also I want to invite you, public, and you, obviously, J.R., A.M., Joseph, Ronni. I'm a columnist and a TV radio presenter for Hello Arte magazine, Canada, where we present authors from many parts of the world. Normally, I host the program with my friend Stacy Hawks from North Carolina that I want to give her a shout out. We invite many authors. We talk about many things about books, and it's a free magazine, a free program, TV program. So please tell me, and we can appoint your interview. And my producer, Graciela Echagüe, that I want to thank her. Thank you again for all the women like Graciela Echagüe, like Gladys Montolio, my mom, that really supported me, Elisa Aguilar Peregrina, that supported me on my journey as author. And thank you again.
Thank you very much. Joseph?
Thank you. Thank you to J.E., Ronni, and Darío for listening to me, conversing. It's been fun. It's been eye-opening, and I enjoyed it. And I will be reaching out to you, Darío, because I'm actually in North Carolina. So, yeah, it's just been great. And you can find me. Most social media is just J.S. Samaniego. You might see Joseph S. Samaniego. If you put in, I know Google, I haven't tried the other search engines, so thanks for the recommendations. If you do put in Google Joseph S. Samaniego, I will more than likely be the first one that pops up. So yeah, you'll find that. Yeah. So other than that, yeah, thanks for listening to me, and thanks for letting me get what I had to say off about my book, because this book is extremely important to me, because it's the first one that I feel like I've put myself more into. And Darío mentioned about our influences of women in our lives. This one actually is dedicated to mi abuelita, who is no longer here. But I felt called to put her in the story. So this is for her.
Thank you so much, Ronni.
Yeah, so you can find me at ronnidavis.com. My handle on every social media is at Lilrongal. That's LILRONGAL. So you type that in, you will find me. I've had that handle since 1997, so it's very dear to me, and I claim it on everything. So When the Stars Lead to You, I can't get my hand to show up, is out now, and This Night Is Ours. My next book is also out because we are time traveling.
Yep.
And this one, again, set in the same world as When the Stars Lead to You, and it was hard to write, but I had a good time writing it, even though it was hard. Once I figured it out, it was good. It wasn't good at first. But yeah, so that one's out. YA, love stories, romances. If you like, well, someone said that when they read This Night Is Ours, they were kicking their feet in glee. And I think as a romance author, that's like the highest compliment that you can get. And yeah, so yeah, you can find me just about everywhere. Don't be afraid to pop in and say hi. Thank you. And thank you to the panelists. It was a great conversation.
And again, E, thank you. You want to wrap her up?
Yeah, thanks to everyone. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this panel a lot. And I will be looking all of you up. So if you see me lurking on your socials, that's why. So I am Liz M. Anderson everywhere. I'm not active on Twitter anymore, but there's an account, but I don't know why people are following me there newly because I don't post anything. I'm most active on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. My website is elizmanderson.com. My debut novel, The Remarkable Retirement of Edna Fisher, which is adult contemporary fantasy starring an 83-year-old heroine, is out now in hardcover, paperback, ebook, large print, God willing, audiobook by the time this airs. We've had some snafus, but hopefully it's out by now. And then my upcoming book, The Keeper of Lonely Spirits, is adult cozy fantasy about an old man cursed with immortality who hunts ghosts, and that comes out in March of 2025. And if you attend my reading during this conference, assuming it didn't already happen, you will get a 10-minute teaser of that. So please attend my reading if it didn't already happen.
Looking forwards and or backwards towards that. Thank you very much. I've been your moderator, J.R.H. Lawless. You can find me everywhere. Probably can't read that, but we can, at Space Lawyer SF. Book-wise, I've got the 3 books there in the General Buzz series, which was long-listed for the first 2 books, or at least long-listed for the Hugo Best Novel. So that's Always Greener, The Rudai Rebellion, which is actually here, and this is the good part, which is the latest bit. You can find me in a few craft books as well, short story collections. Craft wise, I was in the Writer's Digest Putting the Fact in Fantasy book that came out just a few months ago, edited by Dan Kobold, so that's highly recommended as well. I'll try to be, and hopefully as many of you as well, try to be on the live discussion during and after this panel airs on the weekend of the 7th to the 9th. We don't have the dates yet, but you in the future do, because that's when you are currently. But I will also, the same weekend, be speaking and moderating at the Nebula conference. So I'll sort it out. I'll try and be there. Hopefully. That's the magic of Discord as well. Thank you all so much. Again, triple apologies to our editor for having overrun a smidgen. And hopefully we're chatting with you right now in the Discord. Thank you so much, everybody. And see you in the future.
Gracias, hasta luego. Thank you.